Welcome to Eye for Iran. Today, striking truck drivers across Iran are blocking roads and ports in a powerful show of defiance, protesting soaring fuel prices, low wages, and rising insurance costs. Now, what began as a response to dramatic cuts in fuel quotas has quickly spread across the nation, reflecting not just economic hardship, but something far more profound. Protests in Iran are often sparked by economic, environmental, or social triggers, but they're sustained by deeper political grievances. For many, these protests are about more than just fuel or freight. Today, we unpack this moment not as an isolated labor strike, but as part of a broader pattern of mounting unrest in a country under internal pressure. We're joined by three expert voices: Alireza Nader, a political analyst and former senior policy advisor at the RAND Corporation, who brings deep insight into Iran's power structure and the state's response to public dissent; Nazanin Afshin-Jam, a prominent human rights advocate and commentator who will speak to the social and moral stakes of these protests; and Mahdi Ghodsi, an economist at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, who will break down the financial pressure fueling unrest across the country.
According to statistics, 60% of society cannot get enough calorie per day.
That on top of survival, at the end of the day, this is about justice and dignity.
Strikes in Iran, particularly transportation strikes, have the potential to paralyze the regime.
Together, we go beyond the headlines to explore what this protest means for Iran today and what it might signal for the road ahead. I'm Negar Mojtahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Welcome, everyone, to the panel. Thank you so much for being here. Let's start by understanding the strike and to set the scene. Alireza, I'll start with you. As an expert on Iran and on foreign policy, just how significant is this moment in the greater context of Iran's history of labor unrest? I mean, is there anything different or more dangerous to the regime about this particular strike or protest? You know, often we've seen strikes happen in the past. They often start as, economic or labor protests, and they happen to be followed by a brutal crackdown, and then the regime is able to take control. Do you see anything different this time around?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. This is a great panel you've gathered. I think the current trucker strikes in Iran are very important. We haven't seen a mass movement against the Islamic Republic since the Mahsa Amini uprising died down. And strikes in Iran, particularly transportation strikes, have the potential to paralyze the regime. We've seen a number of these strikes in the last 10 years, I would say. I've been really tracking the Barandazi or regime overthrow movement against the Islamic Republic since 2017, when it started at the end of that year. And there have been several mass economic strikes against the regime. Truckers, bus drivers, massive strikes in the energy sector. Each time, unfortunately, the regime has been able to either crush them, or I think one of the big problems that strikers in Iran face, because they live in a totalitarian country, they have a very hard time organizing. They don't necessarily always have a central headquarters or node or network that can really coordinate all these strikes. But today's strikes, I think we're in the 8th day of the strikes. I think they're very important. They're getting major international media attention, and I think they have a lot of potential. And it's really important for everybody who wants freedom and democracy in Iran to support them.
Alireza, you said something very key. You said paralyze the regime. This has the potential to paralyze the regime. What do you mean by that? Would, for example, the oil and gas, would they join in on these protests, and would this lead to more civil disobedience across the country? What are your thoughts?
Well, if you take a look at the 1979 revolution, the economic strikes against the Shah played a major role in the overthrow of that regime.
Most definitely.
You can even argue that the Shah wasn't really defeated politically until strikes in the petroleum and energy sector. So if let's say the transportation sector in Iran goes on strike, not just truckers, but bus drivers. And there are indications that's happening already, by the way. But if bus drivers, train drivers, they go on strike, and then the energy workers decide to go on strike, then you have communications, transportation, and energy cut off in Iran. So I think that's why the regime is very worried about this movement. It has arrested several truck drivers. It's beaten some of them up, threatened their families, but they haven't given up yet. I think civil disobedience, nonviolent resistance against the Islamic Republic is the best way to fight this regime. And what the truck drivers are doing is really inspiring. It's a great strategy.
And Mahdi, you're an economist, and we had you on Eye for Iran with another economist, Mohammed Moshinshian, not too long ago, actually. And you both rightly predicted. You said sometime close to summer, in the summertime, there's going to potentially be a rise in fuel prices, and we are going to see strikes or protests. You were very correct and spot on about that. So can you walk us through some of the economic mechanisms that are behind these protests and the pressures that these truck drivers are under right now?
Sure, definitely. Actually, first of all, thanks for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be among other panelists. Yeah, the issue of economic concerns and economic conditions in Iran has been a major issue for many people in the society. And let's say that since 2011, that Iran was targeted by international sanctions, by multilateral sanctions, and then after the JCPOA, Donald Trump imposed secondary US sanctions, then since let's say 14 years, Iranian currency has devalued by 98%, and its inflation has been hovering more than 40% in the past 6 years. So economic conditions are very dire, and that pushes people to go on strikes. In addition, the government cannot sustain its budget, cannot sustain its payment for the fuel subsidy. The fuel, or let's say benzene or gasoline in Iran, cost about 2 cents, around 2, 3 cents for every individual that wants to pay for gasoline and benzene. And the government is not managing to pay it anymore. So that's why they're trying to find ways to increase the price of gasoline within maybe 1 month. They started negotiating with the IMF, and they will have some meetings with the IMF in the next few weeks, maybe in Austria or in Singapore, to discuss the issue of energy subsidies. They want to remove or they want to reduce the energy subsidy. And as we have seen in the past, the reduction, or let's say the reduction of subsidy, the increase in price of subsidy at the time of Rouhani, it pushed people to the streets. It was not only a specific sector of economy, it was the whole society who went to the streets. So now they announced already that they want to reduce the quotas that is based on the subsidy payment on benzene and gasoline for truck drivers. And truck drivers are like many other labor, many other employees in the society. They are feeling so terrible about their economic conditions in the past few years. So if they increase the price of gasoline, and if they reduce the quota for subsidized gasoline, they cannot tolerate it. At least we can say that they cannot pay it anymore, and that's what that could be the main cause of pushing them to the streets even before the subsidy is ending. So I should say that that's the major cause for now, but many other factors could also come in, and many other sectors, many other professions could also join a strike if this continues to be like this.
Yeah, there's a lot to look out for in the coming weeks. I want to shift our focus now onto human rights, and Nazanin, you're a human rights activist. You've described this truckers' protest as a fight for basic dignity. Why is it so important to see this as more than, just some labor dispute, and how would that help to reframe the narrative here?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we just spoke about the economic implications, and I know that the regime would like to contain the narrative as if this is just an economic issue, but it's way more than that. These strikes in Iran by the truckers are not just a protest about wages or high fuel prices or high insurance per se, but it's much broader and systemic. I would say it's a display of frustration that they are at their wits' end with the regime's corruption and mismanagement and utter lack to provide basic needs and rights. And that is why we're seeing a deep cross sectional support for them by other unions, students, teachers, and marginalized groups. So having prominent members of society like Narges Mohammadi, the Nobel Peace Laureate, and the filmmaker Jafar Panahi, it confirms that on top of survival, at the end of the day, this is about justice and dignity.
No, that's very true. And Alireza, let's go into the geopolitics and the political implications here. How strategically important are the truckers, and could this be the catalyst that leads to change ultimately?
Well, interestingly, the strikes are taking place as the Trump administration is negotiating a nuclear deal with the Islamic Republic. There are indications that actually the two sides are close to reaching an agreement. President Trump himself mentioned this a couple of days ago. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's an agreement between the Islamic Republic and the United States very soon. There's hope among proponents of maximum pressure against the regime that the Trump administration would have pursued a similar policy as it did the last time Trump was in power, a policy of maximum pressure, supporting the Iranian people. And it doesn't look like that's going to be happening anytime soon anyhow. So it's very important that the truckers in Iran obtain international support. If not from the Trump administration, then from even non-governmental groups across the world that really could raise their voice and give more credibility and more support to these truckers. For example, the AFL-CIO in the United States, which is a major labor union, should really speak up on behalf of these truckers. And this has happened in the past. I recall that a few international organizations and American labor organizations did support the strikers in the past. And this is not just a political issue, like Nazanin said, this is an issue of human dignity. These people are fighting very hard to survive. They have families to feed. They can't work. They can't earn enough to eat. And the only thing the regime is doing to solve their problem is resorting to violence.
And you talked about, the unions and support. Why haven't we seen that kind of support yet, Alireza?
I think it's lack of information in general. As long as the U.S. and international media doesn't cover these strikes, then the American public is not going to know about them. Fortunately, there was a really good article in Fox News by Benny Weinthal, and he has managed to draw attention to this very important issue. I saw that the Washington Post talked about it, wrote a pretty good article about the labor strikes. So it's gaining attention, but I think it's a responsibility of pro-democracy activists to also go to these organizations and talk to them, tell them what's been happening in Iran, why they should support these strikers. I'm hopeful that more international attention can be gained, even if the United States doesn't come in support of these strikers, that other influential civil rights and civic organizations can help them.
I think if I can jump in
Yes, please.
there, Negar,
I was going to ask you
think-
for what kind of global response. And you mentioned Jafar Panahi, you mentioned Narges Mohammadi, and also of course Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has also voiced his support and talked about how unions can use this as a fight against the Islamic Republic establishment. So what do you think needs to be done, Nazanin?
Well, I just wanted to jump on what Alireza was saying, and he's absolutely right that the onus is really on us to share and spread the information. I think we always think somebody else is going to do it, but it's up to not just human rights advocates and democracy advocates, but just general citizens living in Canada, in the United States, in Europe. I was on the website this morning trying to find contacts for my, truckers union phone numbers or emails that we can put pressure on them to not just act in a symbolic way, which is important in itself, but also to put pressure on our governments and in Western liberal democracies to do something more. And Alireza also mentioned the importance of media. It's up to us to call our news outlets and channels and let them know this is a major event. This is a momentous event that we cannot miss out on. And there was a letter that was signed by over 180 human rights and democracy advocates and scholars, not just on the outside of Iran, but mostly on the inside of Iran. And what they were pushing for was for governments of the world to boycott this regime economically and have targeted sanctions, just as they had done to South Africa during the apartheid. And the other major demand that they had made on this letter was encouraging the International Labor Organization to expel the Islamic Republic from their body. So there's different ways, and Ali has also mentioned that in the past unions have gotten involved. I think there was a lot of support back in 2018 when we saw a similar movement. But I think now with was it 130 cities, over 30 provinces that these truckers are striking.
And it keeps growing, yeah.
It's incredible.
And do you think, Nazanin, that it's resonating with, everyday Iranians in the diaspora and with non-Iranians too? Do you think it's resonating that this is going, as you said, beyond a labor dispute and how significant it is?
I think at the beginning, I didn't see much activity online, at least. But I think now that the days are going ahead and I think they're seeing that it's not letting up, I think people are starting to realize that this might be a big chance. So people are understanding that this is not just a support for truckers per se or unions per se, but that this can be a real opportunity. And I really think it's resonating among different classes and genders and different groups of people that they can come on board to potentially use this as a catalyst for a complete collapse of the regime.
Now, this is a question for everyone. I'm interested to get your thoughts. Alireza touched on the nuclear negotiations between Tehran and Washington, D.C. happening right now in the talks. Would Washington would they want to use this as leverage in any way? And would this help to increase their support for Iranian people? Or are they going to kind of, put this under the carpet so that they can get a deal done in response to this, urgency or need for the White House, for the zeal for the deal, so to speak? Mahdi, we'll start with you, then Alireza and Nazanin.
So I think the maximum pressure is not done. The maximum pressure is still there. And Trump and his administration showed in the past few months that they have intensified sanctions. They targeted companies like Chinese companies who were buying oil from Iran. So they are trying to maximize the pressure still. And I think the maximum pressure is not only through the US, it's also coming from within. There are different even political camps in Iran that are pressurizing Khamenei to not make a deal with Trump. And at the same time, the society is boiling, and the society is pushing immense pressure on the regime to do something, make some changes. So in the beginning, the truck drivers or any kind of a strike, they do not want to become political, and they try to be focusing on their agenda, what they want, what they demand, and for now it is economic. Of course, there are plenty of other things that they have in mind, but in order to avoid suppression and oppression, they try to focus on their agenda. So at the same time, Trump sees it, but as we all know, Trump is unpredictable, and he would like to achieve his own agenda and his own goals. And the best thing that he would like to get at this time, that his trade policy, his tariff policy gets into problems, it's much easier for him to get a deal with Iran, to have a winning chip at home and argue for that. So I'm not sure if he will support the civil society in Iran, if he will support the protesters, but US is not the only one. There are plenty of other nations, the European ones, they need to be informed about this. There are plenty of other activists in the EU, human rights activists, that are providing more and more information about these strikes. So if I think it's a tipping point for the Islamic Republic, because if the strike becomes more and more general and more people go to the streets, at this specific critical juncture, many things could happen. So I'm not sure if Trump has anything to do with it, but I'm pretty sure that people from within Iran have many things to do with it.
Well, when it comes to the Trump administration, there is a lot of pressure on Trump not to get involved in foreign conflicts. A lot of Americans who voted for him are really fatigued by what they perceive to be these endless military conflicts in the Middle East and the Muslim world. And if you pay attention, when the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, came to the White House, President Trump indicated that he's going to strike a very independent policy when it comes to Iran. I don't think that the president himself is interested in helping civil society in Iran. His administration has either cut or frozen major programs that help dissidents in Iran. Voice of America, Persian, is no longer in existence. So actually the Trump administration has weakened the ability of protesters and strikers in Iran. But I think there's a positive to this as well. And this is what I tell anybody, any Iranian in Iran or outside of Iran: do not count on foreign support to overthrow the Islamic Republic. I think foreign support is important. It's what we want, but we can't really count on others to do the job we have to do ourselves. And not just the truckers, but every part of Iranian society. Farmers who are combating the water mafia in Iran, they have a vital role to play. Teachers, women rights activists. And if all these groups come together, they can really damage or even defeat the Islamic Republic. And I really do believe that the Islamic Republic is the weakest it has been since the revolution. It is a very vulnerable regime. So whether the Trump administration comes to an agreement or does not come to an agreement, that does not or should not affect how people in Iran resist the Islamic Republic. And civil disobedience is the best way. Mass protests, mass strikes. The challenge will be, how do you resist the regime's repression machine? Because the repression machine, the Sepah, the Basij, all the different militias, they're still relatively strong as far as we can tell. But even within the regime, there is a recognition among some members that the Islamic Republic is ultimately doomed and nothing can save it. Even if there is a nuclear agreement, even if there is some sanctions or relief, it could buy the regime some more time, but it will not save the Islamic Republic.
Nazanin, your take?
Yeah, sure. I agree that up until now, the US administration has been really heavy on the maximum pressure side of things. But perhaps maybe I'm being too hopeful that maybe these truckers' strikes will spark the other very important side, which is maximum support for the Iranian people. Like Alireza said, the regime is at its weakest. And so the United States can absolutely use this truckers' strike on top of everything to leverage what they want. I would encourage the US administration, if I could, to stop separating human rights from diplomacy. they have the power to center Iranian civil society at the core and incorporate human rights centered kind of as a deal where Iranian people's rights are respected. And I'm not just saying this as some kind of fluffy point of view based on like moral imperative, but really from a strategic point of view. Because if they're really concerned about Iran's nuclear proliferation or regional security, the best bet that they have is supporting freedom-loving Iranians. And maybe this trucker strike will jog that memory, and perhaps more sound-minded people in the administration like Rubio, who have an understanding of civil resistance and really know the struggle of democratic movements, might just have an influence in reminding Trump of this.
That's a really good point, Nazanin, because there really are people with varying foreign policy initiatives working with Trump. Like Alireza pointed out, you've got kind of some of the isolationists, and then you've got people like Marco Rubio that you just mentioned. And, last week I was speaking to, on the last episode of Eye for Iran, with Gaith Al-Omari, and he is with the Washington Institute, and he used to be a former Palestinian peace negotiator under Mahmoud Abbas. And he was talking about Trump's recent Persian Gulf tour. And he was saying that clearly indicated that Trump, and at least the administration, is really interested more in transactions and the economics behind it and what they can get out of it. And that they're really, unlike previous administrations like Barack Obama, for example, human rights, depending on your perspective, is not really the core of what they're putting out there. So as in terms of what they've put out so far, like you said, but as you mentioned, there are people with varying perspectives within that administration, and there's no telling with Trump from day to day really what's going to happen, right? So there's definitely room potentially for change, like you said, to be hopeful, right?
And I really agree with that. If I may add for a
Please
second, things can change dramatically, right? We're in a very fast changing world. Things can change in America very quickly, as we see. I mean, America is changing politically every day. And things in Iran can change very quickly. The nuclear talks can collapse. Khamenei can die. There could be other natural...
That's a big one, right? He's 86, so that's a big one.
Yeah, man-made disasters in Iran, like what we saw in Bandar Abbas. Some people wondered if that was the Islamic Republic's Chernobyl moment. When Chernobyl hastened the collapse of the Soviet Union. So things can really, really change very quickly. And I think one of the problems activists inside Iran and outside of Iran have faced is this sense of hopelessness, that there's no hope, that everything is going against their interests. But I think that could change very, very quickly as we see today.
And Alireza, how do you think the regime is reading these protests right now? For them, is this just another protest on a long list of protests like we've mentioned, or is it something different for them this time, like in terms of their response? I mean, I know that they've sent out their own kind of IRGC truckers to move around goods in the meantime, but given, like everyone has pointed out on this panel today, Iran is at its weakest state post all these Israel attacks and their proxies in the region taking a punch, so to speak. Does that change their relationship with how they respond? Like, how do you feel that they're reading this protest this time around, or the strike, I should say?
I think the regime is terrified of these strikes, really terrified. It sees them as an existential threat, and it has faced several of these strikes in the past several years and has worked hard to defeat them. This is why the Islamic Republic doesn't allow unions or any organized labor in Iran, because it knows that they can paralyze a regime. I mean, these are ordinary people. These are not necessarily political people. They're trying to feed their families. These are everyday people, and it's everyday people that have been resisting and revolting against the regime. And so I think this has major potential.
Mahdi, going back to the the economics behind this is affecting key shipping hubs now nationwide. What kind of impact could this have on Iran's economy, particularly inflation, the supply chain, the real, and how does the economic disruption then, I guess, intersect with how the government controls society and civil disobedience and any kind of public dissent?
Um, so the situation is that there is not enough amount of data to work on with. But as far as we see some estimates, there are different types of trucks and different types of transportation. If there's some foodstuffs that could get corrupted on the way, or if they're waiting for a long time, then the whole transportation or the whole cargo will be wasted. So there are some estimates that it costs billions of tomans per day if they do that. But um, let's
Can
not.
Iran afford that? Sorry to interrupt, but I'm interested in what you just said. That's very important. Can Iran even afford that, given the state they're in?
Uh, Iran cannot afford that. No, the government cannot afford that. So that's why they are changing their policy. And I think I'm not sure if the government was not ready for this because they were thinking about such kind of event by increasing prices of oil and gas or gasoline since 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So they were thinking about also strikes and there could be potential uprising as we saw in woman life freedom, in the first few days, or let's say in the first few weeks, the security forces were just surveilling. So I think now we are in that phase that they are just surveilling. There's no suppression. There's no um, arrest. So now they're just trying to gather more and more information in order if it spiral out to a bigger protest, then they could crack it down. But in terms of uh, damages to the economy, of course, the supply chains are hampered. But of course, there are some other means of transportation like train. But most of the transportation from ports, like the initial point was from Bandar Abbas, they are very important hubs and routes that bring imported goods from ports to different parts of society. So if that is affected, different parts of society will see an increased prices in goods. They will not find several products on the market very soon, and there could be some additional discontent coming from the society. So that's why I think if it continues like this in few days, in few weeks, people will see that there's some challenges and some problems, and they go to the streets. So the motto is like what we observed after the revolution in the UK, that the people would like to have representation for taxation. So the Islamic Republic is not taxing the society that much as we knew from the United Kingdom, but they are taxing it in a different way by increasing prices because they want to finance their budget. So that's the different kinds of taxation that the society is enduring. And now they want to have a role, the society would like to have a more important role in deciding their own fate. And that's why I call it taxation for representation is taking place. So the last goal, or let's say the last step of the society, is to make the government and the regime responsible for their policy.
Now, before we wrap, and I'd like to hear from each one of you your perspective on this, what should we be watching out for in the coming days and in the coming weeks? And what gives you hope or potentially concern about where this is headed? Alireza, we'll start with you, then Nazanin, then Mahdi.
What I'm really looking for is whether these strikes spread to other sectors of the economy. If bus drivers, taxi drivers, energy workers, teachers, farmers go on strike as well. During the 1979 revolution, there was a mechanism to coordinate all these strikes within Iran. Today in Iran, it is much more difficult to coordinate because the Islamic Republic is one of the most ruthless regimes on the planet today. But I think there's potential for the strikes to spread to other sectors. I just saw on X, or formerly known as Twitter, that a bus driver expressed him joining the strikes as well. Trucks, that service different petrochemical and energy facilities are also going on strike. So I think one key thing to look for is whether other Iranians join these strikes. And again, I think the potential for that is really high. If not this time around, it could happen in the future. I think one of the issues is every time there have been strikes in Iran, over time they die down. And I think the key is maintaining momentum. And even if there are street uprisings in Iran, maintaining that momentum, not going back to their homes, surrounding government facilities, just shutting everything down in Iran so the Islamic Republic can't survive.
Yes, what I'm really concerned about are arrests in the coming days. We've already seen in the past couple days that some truckers have been arrested and detained. And not only are they getting arrested, but those bystanders that are videotaping the strikes and are sending it to international media are now getting arrested and detained. So there's definitely a concern for people's human rights in the coming days. And who knows, with this regime, you never know the extent of violence and repression they can put on the people. Could they use certain people as an example, potentially put death sentence against them? I don't know. I mean, my mind always goes to the worst with this regime. So there's definitely that concern. But as far as I have hope, not necessarily in world leaders or necessarily diaspora groups on the outside of Iran. They've tended to disappoint us in the recent time, but I always have a lot of hope when it's a grassroots movement from within Iran, and that's what we're seeing happening. So I echo what Alireza says, in that I hope that it goes across different sectors and we see movements from women, from the LGBTQ, from other unions and teachers and student associations come on board. But also, I don't want to be too quick and naive, because we really expected the best after the Woman Life Freedom Revolutionary Movement, and we saw that collapse because of the level of violence. So I think this round, we really have to be strategic. We have to maintain the news internationally. We need to have serious organization, proper structure, and planning, and of course, resources. This is a big one. I think the Iranian diaspora community really needs to dig deep in their pockets and find ways to send some money back home to keep this strike going.
May I add one thing? After Mahsa Amini was murdered during the Woman Life Freedom uprising in Iran, something really beautiful actually happened in Washington, D.C. I've never seen the Iranian American community mobilize the way it did. Somebody, a staffer from a very important congressman's office, actually told me that Congress had received, he said 30,000 calls, and that was like a few years ago, so it's much more than that.
Wow.
Tens of thousands of calls from Iranian Americans telling members of Congress to pressure the Islamic Republic to pay attention to human rights. Yes, the traditional political groups in the diaspora are very disappointing. They don't do anything except burnish their own credentials. But regular Iranian Americans have worked really, really hard. And I think we can do that again. You don't need anybody to lead you. You can call Congress yourself. You can contact your representatives yourself. You can contact newspapers. Tell your friends, tell your family members so word spreads. Grassroots action is much more important than anything else we can do right now. Thank you.
No, thank you. And Mahdi?
I also agree with Alireza that we need solidarity with Iranians who are going on to strikes and protests, and that's what we have observed. And there's a great amount of experience that we have right now how to support Iranians within Iran, and I think we can make it work. One thing that I wanted to add was such kind of economic strikes are different from protests, are different from social protests. The way that I see it is that economic strikes are usually shutting down businesses, which are neither violent nor following any kind of regime change scenario. So that's why it's difficult to suppress them. So we need to see, we need to wait and see what the regime would like to find as tactics to disperse them, to stop them. But I think it's not going to be that much violent. So that's a good point about this. And because it's not going to be violent, then I don't think that shutting down the internet would take place. So in the future, in the next few weeks, we need to wait and see how they would crack down the protest. And we need to find ways in order to support them. So additional support, in addition to transferring money through relatives, could be finding good, let's say, foundations, good um, government budgets in Europe, in the US, to be able to transfer money to those who go on strikes. Because if they want to go on a strike for about 1 month, they lose their monthly salary. And if the tactic of the government would be to stop them from working afterwards, then they will be in trouble. So financial support through Western government should be the important key here, and we should work and find out ways how we can do that. The third point that I wanted to make was such kind of strikes would paralyze the government because they cannot provide the services that are needed in the economy. So if they take longer, then it could become more problematic. So if in the meantime Trump allows Iran to sell oil, or if Trump allows IMF to give Iran some loan for this, then the regime would not listen to the people who are striking. So this is an additional layer of what people who are in the diaspora or outside Iran should tell governments like Trump's government to stop the regime, to stop financing the regime. And if all of these go in the same direction, in a good direction, then we can expect a comprehensive, comprehensive strike across different sectors that could push to something if there is a great communication between across sectors, between sectors, and if there's some leadership. We know there are plenty of leaders within Iran who have political base. We know plenty of leaders who are out of Iran who emerged after the Mahsa Amini movement. So if they manage to get into alliance and preserve the communication between sectors, between the leaders and those who are doing the strikes, then I think there's a high chance of being successful right now.
That's an interesting distinction you made between kind of like the economic based protests and social based protests. Does that in some way then leave the Islamic Republic establishment in kind of a tricky situation because they won't know how to respond to it?
I think currently, because the economic situation is the making of Khamenei himself in the past 14 years, because of being stubborn on the nuclear activity that is not beneficial at all. There's no economic benefit behind that. So that's why I think if it is economic unrest, if it is economic concerns, then many people in the society, many politicians within the camp of even hardliners would point a finger at Khamenei himself. So that's not a good thing.
And
I think
Alireza, not
Negar,
yeah,
I
please
think
go
it's
ahead. Yeah.
really interesting to note the fact that I think I read that there's over 500,000 truckers in Iran, and they're all well, they're private, so they own the trucks and have their own businesses, whereas only 30% is public, like connected to the government. So that plays a big role in whether this is going to be sustained or not.
Also, if truckers decide not to work, that is their right. It's not illegal not to work. I think if we consider 2019, the Aban uprising, when the price of fuel went up and people came into the streets against the regime resorted to mass violence. And I think that's an interesting point, actually. Um, can the regime inflict that sort of violence on people who decide not to work? Because the truckers are not explicitly calling for the overthrow of the political system. They just can't work. They can't make it. They can't afford the fuel price increases. They're getting crushed, literally getting crushed. So I think that's an important point. That's interesting.
And yeah, that's a really fascinating angle that I didn't consider before that's emerged from this conversation. So my kind of deduction, and I'm interested to see what you guys all think, does that then leave the regime in a very vulnerable position, like when you look at it from that angle?
I think, and I don't know if the other panelists know the question to this answer. What I'm really curious about as a researcher is how the other strikes in the past ended. Did the regime make concessions? Did it crush them through repression? Did the strikers decide that they had gotten enough incentives to stop the strikes? For me, that's a key question. I don't know if you know the answer to that.
Do you guys know, Mahdi or Nazanin, you want to jump in?
Unfortunately, I don't.
I think nothing happened in the previous strikes or in any kind of protest within this regime. Any protests remain unanswered. Nobody listened their voices. But now we are hearing from the speaker of the government that they are listening. They hear people. So for the first time in the history of Islamic Republic, the Islamic Republic is hearing people. So I think that's a different attitude, and the attitude is different because Iran is in its most vulnerable situation, as you also said, Negar. So I think there could be some compromise if they don't manage to get atomic deal on time. There should be some compromise, meaning they could maybe potentially extend the deadline of increasing the oil prices. It should happen in tier within a few weeks. Maybe they extend the deadline for a few months until they know for sure that they manage to sustain the situation, they can manage to sustain the budget, and then do something else. Because there should be some subsidies being paid to these truckers who are on strike, and there's no money for that. So if they want to achieve that, they need a deal. So I think it's a very precarious situation for the Islamic Republic to decide on that.
I think the Islamic Republic will definitely try to use an opportunity to tame the situation. And, now that the truckers have kind of like a bargaining tactic, they'll try to appease. But I think once this movement grows, they won't be able to contain it because it'll be a larger moral and civil revolt. And at that point, I think it's wild and it'll expand. Yeah.
And Mahdi, can you paint a picture for us of what is the standard of living and the quality of life for these truckers? Of course, they're protesting or striking because of, as we said, low wages, unaffordable insurance, and the potential for that fuel hike that we talked about. So what is their quality of life when you compare them to other sectors of Iranian society? Like, just how bad is it for them?
According to statistics, 60% of society cannot get enough calorie per day. So if we consider
That's
all
heartbreaking.
labor,
I'm sorry, just
that's
hearing that, it's
heartbreaking. Yeah,
It's
heartbreaking.
terrible.
that's terrible. Yeah, and according to statistics provided a few years ago by Rouhani's administration, 33% of society is under poverty. So I believe many workers like truck drivers or even teachers who are teaching at schools, they cannot afford their living anymore. And by increasing prices, by increasing insurance costs, by increasing oil cost, price of energy, uh, I'm not sure if they are out of poverty. So they are struggling their lives substantially. And only 30% of the whole population is working officially. It means that only 30% of population is paying for the rest of the population, which is 70%. So imagine a truck driver who has a family of 4 or 5, and he's only on his own salary. And as far as I read on the net, they get about 13 million toman to 20 million toman, which is even less than 200 euros per month. And with this 200 euros, they need to pay for products like food that has almost the same price as in Europe because they changed the preferential exchange rate. So it's not affordable anymore. The government knows it very well, and that's why they are negotiating with Trump to get out of this trouble.
And what's so frustrating, of course, is the fact that this government, one of the biggest oil rich countries in the world, doesn't have to be in this predicament. It has the means, but instead chooses to fund, terrorist proxies and other, expansion of Islamist ideology in other countries. So I think that's why it's so infuriating. And personally, I get messages almost daily from people inside Iran telling me that they don't have enough food for their children. They open their fridge and take videotapes, and they say, today we're not eating, or I'm going to be evicted tomorrow and I have 3 children. This is the reality, not just for truckers, but across the country. And I think that's why this strike means so much more than just wages and high inflation prices, et cetera, et cetera.
Alireza, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to add?
No, that statistics that only 30% of people in Iran work, that's just incredible. It's hard to see like how much misery there is in Iran. It really, really greatly saddens me that Iranians have to live like that. But I know they can overthrow their regime. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be costly. But Iranians have demonstrated in the past that they can overthrow evil. And I think this regime is evil. And we're finally going to win. But every person has a job to do. Whether you live inside of Iran or outside of Iran, you can help. And I would encourage everybody to help in their own way. Don't wait for anybody else to take action. Take action on your own.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining I for Iran today. I really appreciate your time, and I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you, Negar.
If you like this episode, hit the like button. Also, leave us a comment. We'd love to know what you think. The I for Iran podcast series is brought to you by Iran International, your go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.